Is it not a strange thing that a man may drown in a river while clutching the very rope that could save him? And stranger still, that another man may throw himself into the current, not to save the drowning, but to be dragged under with him. We are taught, quite rightly, that kindness is a virtue, and indeed, who would wish to be called unkind? But there is a hidden danger in indiscriminate charity, a folly in offering one's hand to those who will only use it to pull you down. A surgeon does not bind up a festering wound without first cutting away the rot. A wise man does not lend his strength to another unless it is to raise him up, not to be dragged into the pit alongside him. There are, then, certain types of people whom it is not only unwise to help, but positively harmful, for them and for you. And if you do not learn to discern between them, your kindness will become a weapon against you. First, there is the one who refuses to see. He is the willfully blind, the man who will not open his eyes even when light floods the room. If you show him the way, he will say it is not there. If you warn him of the pit, he will call you a liar. He does not need help. He needs to desire the truth, and no man can give another such a desire. Then there is the perpetual victim. He cries for aid not because he wishes to rise, but because he finds comfort in being pitied. He does not seek a way out, only someone to listen to his woes. If you give him bread, he will not eat it, but show it as proof of his suffering. He is not looking for healing, but for witnesses to his wounds. Beware also the entitled taker, the one who believes he is owed what he has not earned. If you give him freely, he will not be grateful. He will ask why it was not given sooner, and if you stop, he will call you cruel, not realizing that generosity ceases to be a virtue when it becomes a demand. Then there is the unteachable fool, the one who scorns wisdom, yet complains of his misfortune. You may show him where he has erred, but he will mock you for it. If you try to guide him, he will turn away, yet he will still lament that he is lost. Such a man does not need help, he needs humility, and that is a thing only hardship can teach. And let us not forget the manipulative beggar, the one who does not ask for help but for control. He weaves a tale of need, not to seek aid, but to ensnare. His pleas are laced with deception, and his gratitude is but a mask. If you extend your hand, he will clasp it tightly, not to be lifted up, but to pull you down. There is also the slothful excuser, the one who would rather complain than labor. He is ever waiting for circumstances to improve before he acts, yet when opportunity comes, he turns it away, saying the time is not right. His plight is not for lack of help, but for lack of will. Then there is the destroyer of good, the one who twists kindness into a tool for harm. If you trust him with gold, he will melt it into shackles. If you grant him a gift, he will use it against you. He does not see generosity as a blessing, but as a weakness to be exploited. And lastly, beware the habitual liar, the one whose words are smoke and whose promises are dust. He does not deceive to survive, but for sport. If he cries for help, it is not because he needs it, but because he sees in you another mark to be fooled. It is not unkindness to refuse aid where it will do no good. True mercy does not coddle a man in his folly, but urges him toward wisdom. Charity must be guided by discernment, lest it become an accomplice to destruction. For a drowning man may be saved, but only if he wishes to grasp the rope, and only if he does not seek to pull his rescuer under with him. Imagine, if you will, a man who has lived all his days in a deep and endless cave, not a cave where adventure and discovery may yet take place, but a cave of his own making, a place where the walls are painted with his own desires, where the echoes of his own voice return to him, comforting and familiar. He has heard of the sun, for many have spoken of it. He has been told that there is a world beyond his cave, one filled with colors he cannot name, with warmth he cannot fathom. But when the truth is laid before him, when the very light of day reaches toward him, he does not turn his face to greet it. No, he shuts his eyes all the tighter. There are some people whom no amount of help can truly assist, for the simple reason that they do not wish to see. It is not that they are incapable of sight. Indeed, their eyes are whole, their minds sharp, but they have long since made peace with their darkness, and to be forced into the light would feel to them like an act of cruelty. If you attempt to lead such a man out of his cave, he will not thank you, he will curse you. If you place truth in his hands, he will call it a burden and cast it away. You may have met such a person before. Perhaps it is the man who dismisses wisdom not because he has examined it and found it lacking, but because he does not wish to be troubled by it. He does not argue against truth with reason or logic. He argues against it with sheer refusal. When presented with evidence, he does not refute it. He simply ignores it, or worse, sneers at it. His comfort is not found in what is right, but in what is easy. And nothing is easier than refusing to think. Or perhaps it is the woman who blames the world for her misfortunes, not realizing that her wounds are not inflicted from without, but from within. She is offered advice, guidance, even a path forward, but she will not take it, not because she is unable, but because to step forward would require her to admit that she was standing still by choice. And such an admission would be far too great a cost. Now, the great error we make, one of the most dangerous errors of all, is to believe that such people merely need more light, more persuasion, more argument, and that if we speak eloquently enough, or loudly enough, or frequently enough, they will finally be convinced. But this is to misunderstand their nature entirely. A man who is asleep does not need another to shake him endlessly. He must wish to wake up. A blind man may need a guide, but a man who refuses to open his eyes will only grow angrier the more you try to describe the road ahead. You may take such a person to the edge of a mountain where the view is vast and glorious, and tell him to open his eyes. You may describe the colors of the sunset, the beauty of the valley below, the grandeur of the sky above, and yet, if he is determined not to see, he will insist that you are making it all up. And if you persist, he will grow hostile. Not because he has examined what you are saying and found it false, but because deep down he knows that if he acknowledges the truth, he must also acknowledge that he was wrong to ignore it for so long. This is the great tragedy of the willfully blind. It is not ignorance in its purest form, for ignorance is merely a lack of knowledge, and knowledge can be given. No, this is something far worse. This is a deliberate rejection of truth, not because the truth is insufficient, but because it is inconvenient. And if there is one thing the human heart despises, it is inconvenience. What then is to be done with such people? Shall we shake them until they see? Shall we drag them out of their cave by force? No, for compulsion does not create conviction. The only thing that can rouse a man from such blindness is his own desire to see. And that desire, if it comes at all, will not come through argument, but through experience. It will come when the walls of his self-made cave begin to close in, when the echoes of his own voice no longer satisfy, when the darkness he once found so comforting begins to suffocate him. Only then, when he himself reaches out for light, will he be able to receive it. This is why indiscriminate help can so often be a wasted effort, and why wisdom must always accompany kindness. It is one thing to guide the lost. It is another to attempt to lead a man who has determined never to move. If you pour water into a cup that is turned upside down, the water does not enter. It spills over, wasted. And if you speak wisdom to one who refuses to listen, your words do not take root. They are scattered in the wind. But here is where many make a second and even greater mistake. They believe that their failure to help is a failure of their own. They believe that if the blind man refuses to see, it is because they did not explain sight well enough. They believe that if their advice is rejected, it is because they did not speak with enough clarity. And so they strive harder, they give more, they explain again and again, hoping that this time their efforts will bear fruit. But all the while they forget one crucial thing. The opening of the eyes is not the work of another. It is the work of the one who must see. There is no cruelty in leaving a man to his own blindness if he has chosen it. There is no lack of charity in walking away when every plea, every reason, every offer has been turned aside. True help is not measured by how much effort we expend, but by whether that effort is received. And when a man has sealed his eyes shut, it is not help he needs. It is time. Time to hunger for truth. Time to feel the weight of his own darkness. Time to realize, perhaps too late, that light was offered to him all along. And perhaps, one day, when his cave is no longer enough, he will open his eyes. But until then, no force on earth can make him see. There are few things more difficult than watching a man drown while refusing to swim. He cries out, not because he cannot move, but because he will not. And yet, if you throw him a rope, he will not grasp it. If you wade into the water to rescue him, he will thrash against you. And if you leave him to his own devices, he will lament that no one came to save him. There are people in this world who do not seek solutions, only sympathy. They do not wish to escape their troubles, for their troubles have become a kind of home to them, a house of sorrow in which they are not captives, but willing residents. If you offer them a key, they will refuse to take it, for they do not wish to leave. They do not truly desire help. They desire only that you sit beside them in their misery and listen to their lament. You may have met such a person before. Perhaps it is the man who finds his misfortunes in every corner of his life. The world is against him, he will say. Fate is cruel. People are unkind. He will recount with great detail every hardship he has suffered, as if his very existence is an endless trial of unfairness. And yet, if you offer him a way forward, a means to rise, he will shake his head, not because the path is impossible, but because it would require effort, and effort is not what he desires. He desires only to be pitied. Or perhaps it is the woman who tells you of the many betrayals she has endured, of how the world has failed her at every turn. She speaks not in search of understanding, nor even in search of comfort, but in search of an audience. If you try to reason with her, she will grow impatient. If you offer her hope, she will turn away. If you tell her that she has the power to change her circumstances, she will call you cold, unfeeling, unsympathetic. For to such a person, the greatest cruelty is not suffering. It is being told that suffering is not the only option. The perpetual victim does not wish to be saved, for salvation would mean the end of their role. They have built their identity upon their affliction. They wear their wounds like a badge of honor, not to remind themselves of what they have survived, but to ensure that all who meet them know of their suffering. To take away their pain would be to take away their purpose. And here is the great danger in attempting to help them. You may come with good intentions, with open hands, with a heart willing to bear their burdens. You may listen patiently, offer wisdom, speak with gentleness, and for a time they may appear to accept it. They may nod as if in understanding, sigh as if in relief. But wait a little while and you will see nothing has changed. The same complaints, the same despair, the same endless cycle of grief. It is not that they do not hear you, it is that they do not wish to be healed. There is a kind of pleasure in suffering, a twisted comfort in believing oneself to be forever mistreated. It absolves a person of responsibility. If the world is always to blame, then nothing is required of them. They need not change, need not grow, need not exert themselves. They need only remain as they are, lamenting the cruelty of life, while refusing to do anything to alter it. It is not that hardship is not real, nor that pain should be ignored, but the difference between a wounded man and a perpetual victim is that the wounded man seeks healing, while the victim seeks validation. The wounded man wishes to be made whole again. The victim wishes only to be acknowledged in his suffering. Herein lies the folly of offering too much help to such a person. They will accept your time, your energy, your words of encouragement, but only so they may use them as fuel for further complaints. They will twist your kindness into proof that their suffering is unique, that no one understands, that no one has ever endured what they endure. If you grow weary of their endless grief, they will say you have abandoned them. If you continue to help, they will pull you further and further into their misery, until you yourself begin to drown in it. One must be careful then in the giving of aid. True compassion is not the mere act of listening, nor is it simply the willingness to stand beside a person in their pain. True compassion seeks to lift, to guide, to restore, and if the one in need of help refuses every attempt to rise, if they insist on remaining in their suffering, then there comes a time when one must step away, not out of coldness, not out of indifference, but out of wisdom. For no man can save one who does not wish to be saved. The unfortunate truth is that suffering alone does not create wisdom. Many believe that hardship necessarily leads to strength, that trials naturally produce growth. But this is not so. Hardship can be a teacher, but only to the one who is willing to learn. There are some who will endure much and come out greater for it, refined like gold in fire. But there are others who will endure just as much and come out bitter, hardened, and more resolved in their despair. It is not the hardship itself that changes a person, but their willingness to rise from it. And so, when faced with such a person, one must ask, is my help truly helping? Or am I merely giving them more to complain about? Am I lifting them up, or am I simply sitting beside them in their despair, offering them nothing but the reinforcement of their own misery? A drowning man can be saved, but only if he wishes to swim. A lost man can be guided, but only if he wishes to find the way. And the perpetual victim may one day rise, but only when they grow weary of their own sorrow. Until then, no amount of help will ever be enough. There is a curious kind of man in this world, one who is not hungry but demands to be fed, not in need but expects to be given, not grateful but resentful when the giving ceases. He does not plead, for pleading is beneath him. He does not ask, for asking implies that what he seeks is a favor and not a right. No, he demands, and if his demand is not met, he will call it injustice. It is strange how easily a man can be persuaded that he is owed something, A gift given freely is received as if it were a wage long overdue. A kindness extended is treated as a duty fulfilled. And before long, what began as generosity becomes obligation, and the recipient, instead of gratitude, feels resentment. Resentment that it was not given sooner, that it was not given more lavishly, that it was not given without expectation. You may have met such a person. He is the one who takes without thought of the giver. If he is lent a coin, he forgets to return it. If he is given a meal, he expects another the next day. If he is offered help, he does not thank, he does not acknowledge, he does not even recognize the effort. Instead, he assumes it is his by right. And if, for some reason, the giving ceases, he does not reflect on what he has already received. He does not recall the times he was aided. No, he sees only the absence, the void, the injustice of a kindness denied. Such a man is not truly poor, though his hands may be empty. He is not truly in need, though he may lack possessions. No, his true poverty is of the soul. He has been given much, but because it came easily, he believes it ought to continue endlessly. And because he has never known the labor of acquiring, he does not understand the weight of what he receives. And here is where the greatest danger lies. When a man takes without gratitude, he does not merely drain the giver, he poisons the very act of giving itself. For generosity flourishes where it is received with humility, but it withers when it meets entitlement. There is no joy in giving to one who does not appreciate, no reward in kindness where it is treated as mere currency to be collected. When a man is met with such ingratitude, he does not think, "I will give again." He thinks, "I have been made a fool." And so, slowly, the wells of charity dry up, not because men have ceased to be kind, but because they have grown weary of kindness being treated as debt. But the entitled taker does not see this. He does not understand why those around him grow distant, why the hands that once gave freely now hesitate. He believes it is cruelty, selfishness, a failure of the world to meet its obligations to him. Never does he consider that he himself has driven away the very kindness he depended upon. There is, of course, no harm in receiving. A man in need must sometimes take what he cannot yet earn, and there is no shame in that. But there is a vast difference between receiving with gratitude and expecting with entitlement. The grateful man takes what is given and cherishes it, but he also seeks, when he is able, to return the kindness in some form. Perhaps not in wealth, perhaps not in goods, but at the very least in acknowledgement, in appreciation, in a willingness to see the giver not as a mere fountain of provision, but as a person who has made a choice to give. The entitled man, however, does not give back, nor does he even recognize that there is something to give. To him, the act of receiving is not an exchange, but a right. And because he believes it is his by default, he never pauses to wonder why it should be his at all. And so, what is to be done with such people? Many would say that generosity should continue regardless, that kindness should be given even where it is undeserved. But kindness, like any good thing, must be given wisely. It is not meant to be poured endlessly into a vessel with no bottom, nor scattered carelessly upon ground where nothing will grow. To continue giving to the ungrateful is not charity, it is waste. One might say that such a man must learn that he must one day come to understand the value of what he has received. And perhaps, in time, he will. But learning does not come from indulgence, it comes from lack. A man who has always had his fill does not know the taste of hunger. A man who has always been carried does not know the weight of his own steps. If he is ever to see what he has taken for granted, it will not be through further gifts. It will be through their absence. There is a reason that a child must sometimes be told no, not because the parent is unkind, not because they wish to see their child suffer, but because they understand that if every desire is met without question, the child will grow not into a man, but into a beggar with no sense of gratitude. And so too must generosity sometimes be withheld, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom, out of the knowledge that some lessons cannot be taught with words, only with experience. A man who has taken much must, at some point, learn what it is to give. A man who has received without gratitude must, at some point, understand what it means to be refused, not out of malice, not out of spite, but out of the simple truth that no one can appreciate the light until they have known the dark. No one can value what is given until they have known what it is to go without. There is no shame in needing help, but there is great shame in expecting it as if it were owed. And there is no sin in giving, but there is great folly in giving without wisdom. For kindness, when met with entitlement, does not produce love, it produces resentment. And when a man demands what he should instead receive with humility, he does not merely harm himself, he corrupts the very thing that was meant to save him. There are few things more exhausting than offering advice to a man who does not seek wisdom, only validation. He comes to you with his troubles, not because he desires truth, but because he desires approval. He asks what he should do, but he has already decided. What he truly wants is not guidance, but permission. If you affirm his path, he will call you wise. If you challenge it, he will call you cruel. It is a peculiar thing to watch a man reject sound counsel, not because it is flawed, but because it is not what he wished to hear. He will nod as you speak, appearing to listen, appearing to reflect, but his mind is elsewhere. He is not weighing your words, he is waiting for them to change. If you should tell him what he does not want to hear, he will argue, not with reason, not with evidence, but with feeling, and if he cannot argue, he will dismiss you. You may have met such a person. He is the man who brings the same problem to you again and again, as though the repetition of his complaint will change reality. He does not seek solutions, for solutions require action, and action requires responsibility. He does not want to be responsible, he wants to be reassured. If you were to tell him, "You must do this difficult thing," he would sigh and say, "But surely there is another way." If you were to insist, "This is the truth," he would frown and say, "But that is so hard." Or perhaps it is the woman who seeks advice, not for the sake of clarity, but for the comfort of being agreed with. If you tell her what she desires to hear, she will praise your wisdom. If you tell her otherwise, she will seek another voice, one more agreeable, more comforting, more willing to tell her that what she already believes is right. And when she finds such a voice, she will cling to it, not because it speaks truth, but because it speaks pleasantly. The great tragedy of such people is not that they do not know the truth, but that they do not wish to know it. They believe that if they ignore it long enough, if they collect enough voices to contradict it, if they surround themselves with enough agreeable company, then perhaps reality itself will bend to their liking, but reality is unmoved by preference. Truth does not change because we dislike it, and no number of agreeable voices can make a wrong path lead to the right destination. And yet, so many waste their time trying. They seek not wisdom, but comfort. They mistake approval for truth, and they will always find someone willing to indulge them. There will always be a voice ready to say, "Do as you please. You are right. The burden is not yours to bear." And such voices, though pleasant, are dangerous, for the man who listens to them does not merely remain lost, he believes himself to be on the right path. It is a strange thing to watch a person reject what would save them. They will walk willingly into disaster, even as they are warned, even as they are shown the consequences of their choices. You may plead with them, reason with them, even beg them to see, but they will not. And the reason is simple: they do not truly want help. They want only to be told that they are already right. To help such a person is not merely difficult, it is often impossible. You cannot give sight to a man who shuts his eyes. You cannot give understanding to one who refuses to listen. And yet, the greatest danger is not to the one who refuses wisdom, but to the one who offers it. For nothing is more exhausting than trying to lift a man who will not stand, nothing more disheartening than offering truth only to have it discarded, not because it is false, but because it is unwelcome. One might think that, with time, such a person will learn, that after enough failure, after enough suffering, after enough missteps, they will come to see that what they rejected was right all along. And sometimes this is true. Sometimes hardship is the only teacher left when wisdom has been refused. But there are also those who, even in suffering, refuse to see. They will not blame their choices, they will not reflect on their mistakes. They will say instead, "I was unlucky," or "I was betrayed," or "the world is unfair." And they will continue seeking voices that will affirm their delusion. And so, what is to be done? Should we continue offering wisdom to those who refuse it? Should we continue giving advice to those who do not wish to hear it? It is a noble thing to help others, but nobility is not in the act alone. It is in the outcome. To speak truth where it will not be received is not aid, it is vanity. To give counsel to one who does not seek it is not kindness, it is waste. It is not cruelty to let a man face the consequences of his own choices. It is not unkind to let him walk the path he insists upon. There are some who must learn not by hearing but by suffering, and even then, some will never learn at all. Wisdom is a gift, but like all gifts, it must be accepted, and if a man will not accept it, then there is nothing more to be done. It is an oddity of human nature that some will ask for your help, not because they need it, but because they wish to make you responsible for their failures. They will bring their burdens to you, not so that they may learn to carry them, but so that they may place them upon your shoulders. And if you are unwise enough to accept this weight, you will soon find that it is not temporary nor occasional, but endless. There is a type of person who does not seek solutions, only carriers. He does not wish to be guided, only relieved of effort. He will tell you that he is lost, but he does not truly seek direction. He merely wishes for someone else to walk in his place. If he stumbles, he will expect you to catch him. If he falters, he will wait for you to correct him. And if he falls, he will not rise on his own, but instead will turn to you with expectant eyes. You may recognize such a person. Perhaps he is the man who constantly finds himself in difficulty, always in need, always at the mercy of unfortunate circumstances. He will tell you again and again of his misfortunes. His money is always short, his plans always fail, his obligations are always too heavy. But if you look closely, you will see that his misfortunes are not accidents, nor are they the results of cruel fate. They are the fruits of his own choices, and though he suffers for them, he does not wish to change them. He wishes only for someone else to bear their cost. Or perhaps it is the woman who complains of her troubles, yet does nothing to change them. She tells you of her struggles, of the ways in which she is burdened. But when you offer her a way out, she hesitates, not because the way is unclear, but because she has no desire to walk it. What she desires is not a solution, but a rescuer. And if you become that rescuer, you will find that she is not truly seeking escape. She is seeking relief from the consequences of remaining exactly as she is. It is a peculiar thing to watch a person refuse to take control of their own life. They will sit in their troubles as though they are chained there, as though no option remains but to suffer. But if you look closely, you will see there are no chains. There never were. The bars of their prison are not locked. The walls of their confinement are not real. And yet, if you attempt to lift them, if you offer them the means to stand, they will resist. Not openly, not with words, but with excuses, with delays, with half-hearted attempts that are designed to fail. And here lies the danger. If you continue to help such a person, you will come to believe that the burden is yours. You will begin to feel responsible for their failures, for their missteps, for their continued struggles. They will not say it outright, but in their eyes, in their words, in the quiet weight of their expectation, they will make it clear. They have given you the duty that was always theirs to bear. But there is a great folly in carrying a burden that does not belong to you. It does not make the other person stronger, it makes them weaker. The more you carry, the less they must. The more you strive, the less they need to. And so what begins as kindness becomes a slow destruction, not of yourself alone, but of them as well. For the longer they are carried, the less capable they become of walking on their own. There are those who believe that true kindness means always helping, always giving, always lifting another's burden. But this is not so. True kindness is not measured by how much we do for another, but by what that doing produces. If our help only makes a man more dependent, if our aid only teaches him to avoid responsibility, then we have not helped him, we have crippled him. There are times when the greatest kindness is not to carry, but to step back, not to relieve, but to allow struggle, not to rescue, but to let a man see, perhaps for the first time, that he alone must bear the weight of his own life. Some will call this cruelty, some will say it is unfeeling, but there is no true compassion in enabling weakness. There is no true love in feeding dependency. For if a man cannot stand on his own, then no amount of carrying will ever make him strong. A man who refuses to bear his own burdens is not truly helpless. He is simply unwilling. And if you take that burden from him, he will never learn to carry it himself. He will always find another shoulder, another rescuer, another well-meaning soul to take his place. And so, if you wish to truly help, you must resist the temptation to carry what is not yours to bear. There is no virtue in making yourself weary for another who will not walk. There is no honor in sacrificing yourself for one who will not rise. True help does not remove struggle, it teaches endurance. And if a man will not endure, if he will not learn, if he will not rise when given the chance, then there is nothing more to be done. There are few burdens heavier than the company of a man who delights in his own misery. He does not wish to be comforted, though he will insist that he does. He does not seek solutions, though he will ask for them. No, his suffering is not an affliction to be healed. It is a possession to be cherished. And if you are unwise enough to try and relieve him of it, you will find that he clings to it more tightly than any treasure. It is a strange thing to witness a man reject hope. He will speak of his troubles at length, as though he wishes for nothing more than to be free of them. He will sigh, he will lament, he will shake his head at the cruelty of fate. But the moment you offer him a way out, the moment you suggest that perhaps his sorrow is not inevitable, that perhaps there is a path forward, you will see something unexpected. A flicker of resistance, a quiet reluctance, a subtle refusal to move. It is as if he does not truly want to be free. You may have met such a person. He is the one who has suffered, yet instead of seeking to overcome, he nurses his wounds as though they give him purpose. He wears his misfortune like a badge, not because he wishes to be healed, but because it sets him apart. He has made grief his identity, and so to let go of it would be to lose himself entirely. If you tell him that healing is possible, that change is within reach, he does not rejoice. He resents it. For if he were to be healed, what then? What would remain of him if not his sorrow? Or perhaps it is the woman who sees herself as forever wronged, forever misunderstood, forever placed at the mercy of an unkind world. She does not seek justice. She seeks to be seen as a victim. She does not seek resolution. She seeks validation. If she were to move on, she would lose the sympathy she has carefully gathered, and so she does not move. She remains, lingering in her suffering, because to leave it behind would be to leave behind the only source of significance she has ever known. There is a great danger in pitying such a person too much, not because they do not deserve compassion, but because they have come to depend upon it. They do not seek strength, but attention. They do not seek growth, but affirmation. And if you give them what they desire, if you indulge their sorrow without question, if you nod along as they tell you how unfair life has been, if you reassure them that they are not at fault, that there is nothing they could have done, that they are forever victims of fate, then you have not helped them. You have only cemented them in their misery. It is easy to mistake such people for the truly broken, the truly helpless, but there is a difference between a man who is wounded and a man who refuses to heal. One stumbles because he wishes to walk, but has not yet found his footing. The other remains on the ground, not because he cannot stand, but because standing would mean the end of his pity, the end of his excuses, the end of the identity he has built around his pain. And here lies the greatest tragedy. A man who refuses to heal will always find someone willing to tend to his wounds. He will find those who will listen endlessly to his sorrow, who will offer comfort without expectation, who will reassure him again and again that none of this is his fault. And though they mean well, though they believe they are offering kindness, they are in fact feeding his illness. They are keeping him weak. They are enabling him to remain exactly as he is. There are those who believe that kindness means never asking a man to rise, never telling him that he must move forward, never suggesting that his suffering, though real, must one day be left behind. But true kindness does not indulge weakness. It calls a man to strength. True compassion does not leave a man in his misery. It urges him toward healing. And sometimes the greatest kindness is not to sit beside a man in his sorrow, but to tell him, firmly and without apology, that he must get up. There are some who will resist this. They will call it unfeeling. They will say it is cruel. But the cruelest thing you can do for a man who refuses to heal is to make it easier for him to remain broken. There is no love in allowing someone to linger in their suffering when they have the power to rise. There is no mercy in feeding a sorrow that should have been left behind long ago. A man who clings to his suffering will always find someone willing to indulge him, But if you truly wish to help, you must be willing to do what others will not. You must be willing to say, enough, not because you do not care, but because you do. Not because you are unfeeling, but because you know that true healing can only begin when a man is willing to stand. And if he will not stand, if he refuses, if he chooses instead to remain as he is, then there is nothing more to be done. There is a kind of person who does not wish to grow, yet desires the rewards of those who have labored. He does not wish to learn, yet envies the wisdom of those who have studied. He does not wish to sacrifice, yet feels entitled to the fruits of sacrifice. He is the man who resents excellence, not because he seeks to achieve it, but because he cannot bear to see another possess what he does not. And if you help such a man, if you lift him, if you offer him the tools to rise, he will not thank you. He will despise you. It is a peculiar thing to witness a man who claims to want success, yet avoids the very path that leads to it. He will say he wishes to improve, but only if the improvement requires no effort. He will say he wishes to be wise, but only if wisdom can be gained without study, but only if strength can be achieved without hardship. He does not truly wish to change. He wishes only to receive. And if life does not hand him what he desires, he will not blame himself. He will blame those who have worked for what they have. You may recognize such a person. Perhaps he is the one who scoffs at greatness, not because he sees flaws in it, but because he resents its existence. When he sees a man who is disciplined, he does not admire him. He calls him lucky. When he sees a woman who has achieved much, he does not seek to learn from her. He insists that she must have had advantages he did not. It does not occur to him that effort and discipline produce results. He believes that all things are given, never earned. And so he is left with nothing, and he is bitter because of it. Or perhaps it is the man who demands assistance, yet rejects every path that requires him to take responsibility. He will ask for your help, but when you give it, he will find fault in it. He will say it is not enough. He will say it is too difficult. He will say that others have been given more. If you tell him to work, he will call you unkind. If you tell him to strive, he will call you cruel. And if you tell him that no one can give him what he refuses to earn, he will call you arrogant. For he does not want to be lifted, he wants to be carried. It is not effort he despises most, but accountability. If he were to admit that discipline creates strength, that learning creates wisdom, that perseverance creates success, then he would also have to admit that his failures are his own. And this he cannot bear. It is far easier to believe that the world is unfair, that others have stolen what should have been his, that fortune has blessed the undeserving while cursing him. It is far easier to blame the successful than to imitate them. And here lies the great danger in helping such a man. No matter what you give him, he will never rise. No matter what you teach him, he will never learn. He will take, but never build. He will receive, but never grow. And the more you give, the more he will resent you. For every act of generosity reminds him of what he has not done. Every piece of wisdom reminds him of what he has refused to learn. And instead of using these gifts to better himself, he will despise the hand that offered them. There are those who believe that to help is always right, that to give is always noble, that to lift another is always good, but this is not so. Help is only help when it leads a man to stand on his own. Giving is only good when it teaches a man to build for himself, and lifting another is only noble when it strengthens rather than weakens. A man who resents the work of others will never do the work himself. A man who envies greatness will never achieve it, and a man who blames the world for his failures will never rise above them. And so, if you offer him help, if you attempt to show him the way, if you give him the very tools he needs, and he rejects them, despises them, and hates you for offering them, then there is nothing more to be done. There is a type of person who does not seek truth, but only the illusion of it. He does not wish to be corrected, nor does he desire to grow. He seeks no wisdom, only the comfort of his own opinions. If you offer him knowledge, he will reject it. If you present him with reason, he will dismiss it. If you challenge his beliefs, not with hostility but with clarity, he will see you not as a friend but as an enemy, for he does not love truth. He loves the feeling of being right. It is a strange thing to watch a man guard his ignorance as though it were treasure. He will insist that he sees clearly, though his vision is narrow. He will claim to understand much, though he refuses to listen. When confronted with a truth that contradicts him, he does not pause to consider it. He recoils from it, as one recoils from a flame, not because the truth is flawed, but because it demands something of him. It demands humility. It demands change. And this, above all, he cannot bear. You may have met such a person. Perhaps he is the one who argues not to learn but to dominate. He does not listen to understand, he listens only to refute. When he hears a viewpoint that differs from his own, he does not weigh it, does not reflect upon it. Instead, he arms himself, ready to attack, ready to dismiss, ready to twist words so that he may remain secure in his own certainty. It is not wisdom he seeks, but victory, and in doing so he ensures that he will never grow. Or perhaps it is the one who claims to desire advice, yet rejects any that does not align with what he already believes. He asks for guidance, but only so that he may hear what he wishes to hear. If you tell him what is true, he will say you do not understand him. If you tell him what is necessary, he will say you are against him. He does not want the burden of wisdom, he wants the comfort of affirmation. And if you deny him this comfort, he will resent you for it. It is a peculiar form of blindness, the kind that is chosen, for there is no man more trapped than the one who refuses to see. A man who does not know may learn. A man who is mistaken may be corrected. But a man who insists he is already right, even when he is wrong, cannot be reached. If he stumbles, he will insist that the ground has betrayed him. If he is lost, he will insist that the map is incorrect. And if his actions lead to suffering, he will say it was not his doing. For to admit fault would be to admit limitation, and he has long since declared himself above such things. And here lies the danger of offering wisdom to such a person. He will not accept it. He will resist it, twist it, and, if he cannot destroy it, he will turn against you for daring to present it. You may think that with enough patience, enough kindness, enough clarity, he will see. But you will find that he is not interested in seeing. He is interested only in defending the small, fragile world he has built within his own mind. And if truth threatens to disrupt that world, he will not surrender the illusion. He will attack the truth-bearer instead. There are those who believe that all men desire wisdom, that all men wish to know, that all men, when presented with reason, will embrace it. But this is not so. A man who fears truth will always find a way to escape it. A man who loves his own opinion more than knowledge will always reject correction, and a man who cannot admit he is wrong will never change. To argue with such a person is to throw water upon a stone and expect it to grow. To correct him is to shine a light into a cave where the inhabitant has long since closed his eyes. And to offer him wisdom is to place bread before one who does not hunger. He does not refuse because he cannot understand, but because he will not. And if a man will not, then there is nothing more to be done. There is a certain temptation to believe that all men can be helped, that with enough patience, enough kindness, enough generosity, even the most stubborn, the most lost, the most unwilling will one day rise. But this is not so. For help is only help when it is received, and wisdom is only wisdom when it is heeded. A man who refuses to grow, who clings to his weakness, who despises discipline, who resents truth, such a man cannot be lifted, for he will not stand. It is not cruelty to walk away from those who refuse to change. It is not unkindness to let a man bear the weight of his own choices. There are those who would say that to love is to endure endlessly, to give without limit, to offer again and again, even when it is thrown aside. But love is not indulgence. Love is not the endless toleration of folly. True love calls a man to strength. True compassion demands that he rise. And if he will not, then to carry him is not love, it is to participate in his downfall. You cannot force a man to see who refuses to open his ignorance. You cannot teach a man who delights in his ignorance. You cannot lift a man who has chosen to remain where he is. And so there comes a time when the greatest act of wisdom is not to give, but to withhold, not to offer, but to step away, not to drag a man toward the light, but to leave him to the path he has chosen, not because you do not care, but because he does not. There are those who will rise when given the chance, those who will take the hand offered to them and stand. These are the ones who should be helped, the ones who will grow, the ones who will, in turn, lift others. But as for those who refuse, who resent, who reject, who cling to their weakness and call it fate, there is nothing more to be done. Let them be.